Welcome to all the beloveds of God as we gather for this time of devotions on Saturday, August 8th. This morning we are going to touch on the story of Joseph in Genesis chapter 37. I am Heather E. Clausen, pastor of Bethel Lutheran Church and the United Methodist Church, both in Herman, Minnesota. I don't know how many of you have been exposed to the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. It was a favorite for many years, opportunities when I worked with youth to actually see it performed. And it is a beautiful expression of this story. This story of a people, the story of God's work with a people, and the story of how, surprisingly, over and over again, God chooses those who are flawed, ordinary, very much like us. I want to read a few selected verses from chapter 37 and then tell a little bit more of the story before we talk about it this morning. Chapter 37. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that his father loved them more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Well, in chapter 37, our story continues, and we find out that Joseph is one who receives dreams and visions. And he tells his brothers about a dream that he has had. And it involves gathering of the sheaves of the grain and the bindings. But in this dream, he is the center one. All of his brothers are gathered around him. And it appears very clearly in this dream that he interprets it as that he is to reign over them. Well, the brothers, they do something that I wouldn't be very prideful about. They decide they're going to kill their brother. They've had enough of him. And at the last minute, they sell their brother into slavery and with some subterfuge make it appear to their father that their brother has been killed. Interesting story, isn't it? We learn a lot just in the detail that I read, even before the summary that I did of the other events in chapter 37, that they're from an immigrant family, an alien, that Joseph is the favored son, and that Jacob, of course renamed Israel, wrote the book on raising a dysfunctional family. In their culture, the oldest son would be the favored one, the one who would be tapped to take over and care for the wholeness of the family, to also be responsible not only for their care, but for their survival. So we now know that Jacob has violated the rules of his own culture by favoring a younger son, the one that's born to him in his old age. He has set up the rivalry by this favoritism, by this coat of many colors, which would be very expensive because dyes were expensive. So right there, there's something that shows that favoritism. Yeah. Sibling rivalry. And many ways, Joseph doesn't help much, does he? He tattles, goes and tells stories on his brothers. He flaunts the favoritism with wearing the coat as he goes to check on them. And he lords over them the fact that he has these visions and these dreams. Well, if we pay attention to the whole unfolding of the story, and I do invite you to read more of the story of Joseph, we realize that out of this enslavement, he will have the opportunity to rule over his brothers if he chooses. But he also is the one who rises to power in Egypt and then is able to save them from the famine. Their identity as a people are two major things, the Exodus and the exile. Those are foundational. And it's a story of the people of Israel, to be sure, but it's really represented to us as God's story, first and foremost. It is God who called. It is God who named. It is God who guided the leaders. It is God who saved. And you know, quite often you can look to this story and say, well, everything happens for a reason, but I don't really think it's quite that simple. I don't see God as a puppeteer, arranging the series of events to bring the outcome that God intends. I do see God as engaging in the difficult times in life and trying to bring the best good out of that. Free will is involved in here. Joseph's brothers had choices. The choices they made were not good ones. They could have negotiated with their father. They could have worked out something with their brother, but they didn't. They chose to respond. And I think one of the things we get out of this story is, well, two really. One is that God does use very flawed people, ordinary people, people like us. And the scriptures don't try to clean that up and take that away. And then the second is, of course, that assurance that sometimes in the midst of the most difficult circumstances, we find God working to bring in the best good. You know, this COVID-19 has changed our world, and it's very different. Some things are opening up. Some of us are straining at the oars to try to keep moving forward and about ready to give up, or we go about our lives as if the boat is unsinkable. And for some, it's resenting the people who call us to account, to care for one another. God is working even through this time, through us and others, to bring life and liberty where there seems to be none. So the moral of our story, if we go there, is fear not, live in faith, follow the current medical advice, trust in God, and follow the way of Jesus. God brought the best good out of horrible intentions in the story of Joseph. Brought the good that would save people. God is working in the midst of our circumstances to do the same. Go in peace. Amen.